Hello everyone, I'm just out for my morning walk, and I had some things on my mind I wanted to get down and put up, so I thought I'd bring my camera along with me and talk about it instead of listening to podcasts like I usually do. And this is all about a video, and this video has this title like, things that piss me off, libertarians, or something like that. This video is just like completely devoid of any intellectual arguments, and the comments are no different. The statists there are just using the same, religious type balderdash that the creationists use to try and justify everything they want to do. But there's an inherent contradiction involved in the things they say, because they keep talking about libertarianism as if we're the ones who want to oppress everyone else under our thumbs and make everyone else live the way we think they should. And of course, it's the exact opposite. It's the statists who have some idea that government should have some control over some part of your life. There's some part of your life that you're either too stupid or you're just not able to do, like decide how much your wages should be for the person you've decided to work for voluntarily, and things like that. So as usual, they resort to all these sorts of tactics and saying that, if we had libertarianism, then we'd all be living in fiefdoms again, and it'd be serfdom, and it would be back to feudal times. And of course, you can only have feudal times. You can only have feudalism if you have the idea that someone can own someone else, and that someone else has some kind of claim over the fruits of your labor. And if someone else has some kind of claim to your property, to your land, or to the things that you grow on the land, or whatever. That's the only way you can have feudalism. And of course, that's exactly what the statists want to do. They say, well, you have your income that you make when you work, and the state gets to claim part of that income. And why does the state get to claim part of that income? Well, because it's really the state that owns the land. You don't really own the land, you're just allowed to use it by the state. Where they said, well, you libertarians with your full allodial title, as some call it, that's fiefdom, we're all going to be serfs under your allodial title. And of course, that's not how allodial title works. Allodial title just gives you the right to use your land however you see fit. Sorry, airplane going by. So allodial title just gives you power over your own land. It doesn't give you ownership over anyone who comes onto your land. If you want someone to come onto your land and work, then you have to contract with that person. You have to have an agreement that says, okay, you're going to come on my land. This is when you're going to come on. This is what you're going to do. This is how much you're going to get paid for doing it. So you have all these things that you voluntarily agree on, and you contract with doing that. And it's the same thing if you want to rent property. If you want to rent it out, if you got a house you're not using, someone else is going to pay you to come and live in it. You contract that out. And so you say, okay, you're going to live here and your lease is for this long and you owe this much a month in rent and so on. But that doesn't give you power over that person. You can't break into that person's rental property and steal his stuff or rape his daughter or whatever. It's a limited contract with a very limited scope. And this brings into the other thing they say, well, you agreeing with the state is voluntary because you can leave anytime you want. Well, and what's ridiculous about this is, first of all, you can't always. You got to go through customs. You also have to, in many cases, including the United States, pay an expat tax. An expatriate tax, also known as an exit tax. Yes, if you want to leave the country and go live somewhere else, you got to pay the IRS. Slaves could buy their freedom. If they saved up enough money to meet their purchase price, then they could essentially buy themselves. They would actually get the deed to themselves. They would own themselves. Essentially, Bob Jones would be a slave owned by Bob Jones. So it would literally be self-ownership. So slaves, if they could manage to save up the money, could buy their freedom. Well, how is an expat tax any different? The only difference may be the amount. But if you say that someone can leave the country and get out of, all of the things that the government does to them, but then you charge them an expat tax to do that, how is that any different than making a slave buy his freedom? I just don't see the difference there. And then the IRS has this neat little catch-22 going on, where you still owe your taxes. And they say, well, okay, well, of course you would owe your back taxes that you earned while you were in the country. But here's the thing. Until you're able to pay those off, you're not able to claim to the IRS that you're no longer an American citizen. So while you're working to pay off those back taxes, any amount that you make for yourself and your family is still taxed as though you were still in the United States. So what that means is even if you've paid off those back taxes, now you've got all these new taxes that you have to pay, and until you pay those, you can't renounce your citizenship, so you have to work to pay those, in which case you're making more income and have to pay the taxes on that as well. But you know what? Let's ignore all that. Let's say that you pack up and leave the country. Hang on, airplane again. But all this comes out to things that are being said about how, well, you can just leave the country. You realize that someone who rents out has a contract with the landlord, and he can move out if he decides he doesn't want to live under the contract anymore. Well, the state, they say, is the same way. You've got this mystical contract, which no one is allowed to see, and nobody ever signed, and nobody ever explicitly agreed to, and they've got all their excuses about that. But let's not even worry about that. Let's say the so-called social contract is valid, and all you have to do is move out of the country, and let's ignore things like the expat taxes and the IRS's little catch-22 there. So ignoring all that, do they really think that packing up and moving to an entirely different country is the same as packing up and moving next door or down the street or whatever, where your kids can stay in the same school and you can stay near your family and you don't have to quit your job and get a job somewhere else? Yeah, I'm like 20 miles from Charlotte Douglas International Airport, so there's a lot of airplanes around here. So anyway, clearly, packing up and moving to a whole different country, if you could afford to do that, is not really the same thing as just moving to another street. Because you get to stay near your family and friends, you get to keep the job you have. So these statists, that's how much their mind is poisoned by the religion of statism. The cult has actually convinced them that these are the same thing, when they clearly aren't. And they clearly have nothing to do with any concept of freedom. But here's the real big contradiction. Here's the thing I really wanted to get. Yes, that was another airplane. Gee, I hope I don't get poisoned by all these chemtrails. Yep, see? You see it up there? There's a chemtrail right up there. No, it's not. It's a contrail. It's just a cloud made by burning jet fuel. Easy to debunk. But anyway, almost as easy to debunk is this idea that libertarians are like serfs, and if libertarians took over, you'd be slaves, and it would be, just like feudal times, and they'd be feudal lords, and they'd be doing all this stuff. Which, again, there's not a grain of truth to that, but let's say there is. Let's say there is some truth to this, that, if libertarians gain power, everyone would be serfs. If that's the case, all right, sorry about that. The battery went low, so this is going to have to be audio only from here on out. I was about done anyway, though. Because I'm going to give the statists every most generous concession possible. So even if I concede this whole social contract thing, despite the fact that no one can show me a contract, unlike a rental agreement with a landlord, and despite the fact that one side and one side only gets to arbitrarily change the terms of the contract at will, and despite the fact that pretty much every civilized court in the world has rejected tacit consent, let's ignore all that and say the social contract is perfectly valid. Then they also complain that they don't want to live in a country run by libertarians because it'll be feudalism or whatever. Even though that's completely bogus, well, let's grant them that too because I'm feeling generous. The thing is, even if we grant them all that, even if we're absolutely as generous as we can be, and just let them have everything, let them have the social contract, let them have this idea that libertarianism would make this a terrible country, let's say that libertarians did manage to take over their country. Doesn't that mean that by not moving out, that they agreed to libertarianism via the social contract? So what right do they have to complain if libertarianism does end up being feudalism, which it's not, of course, but we're being generous. So even if it is the fact that libertarianism would lead to feudalism, what right would they have to complain? They stayed in the country. By not leaving the country, they agreed to it via the social contract, right? Sorry, statists, but you can't have it both ways. You can't have one set of rules for you and another set of rules for everyone else. If you're honestly going to tell us that we agreed to this social contract, and somehow that means that we agreed to have our junk groped at airports, and we agreed to have our kids sent across the world to die in these wars that don't have anything to do with protecting us, and if you agree that our incomes and our businesses should have all this money taken from us to give to big, rich corporate cronies, and if you actually think that we agreed to have gay marriage banned and all these other terrible things the government does, well, if libertarians take power, then that means you agreed to libertarianism, right? By not moving out of the country? Isn't that what you're saying? Isn't that your own argument? So, yeah, this whole argument, like all statist arguments, is just completely self-defeating. You know, no matter what the government does, we agreed to it via the social contract because we didn't leave. Well, why doesn't that apply if libertarians take over? Oh, but then it's serfdom. Well, according to you, those actual serfs back in the Middle Ages, people who actually were denied not only their property rights, but were also denied complete self-ownership, which is a very core of practical libertarianism, is self-ownership. Didn't those very serfs agree to it because they didn't move away? They say, well, they stopped them from moving away. Well, no, we just said that that wasn't the case, because they can stop us at customs. They can, make us pay an expat tax to get away. The serfs could have left if they had paid, whatever tolls or whatever that the lords had put on them. They could have left, which means they agreed to it. And libertarians are in favor of open borders. So we're not in any way going to stop you from leaving the country if you want to. In fact, it'll be a lot easier than it is now because we're not going to stop you at customs. We're not going to make you pay an expat tax. It'll be easier to leave the country under libertarianism. So doesn't that make libertarianism more valid than feudalism and more valid than your precious state? See, you can't have it both ways. If you want the social contract, then you can't complain about anything that libertarians would do if they take over. You're saying that we don't have any right to complain about what government does when they grab our crotches at airports or do any of the other things they do to us, so why isn't that the case? I'm really trying to think of a response they could possibly have to this. And the only thing I can come up with is, well, why should I have to move? Why should I have to move out of the country just when you libertarians take over? Why don't you move? Why do I have to move out of the country when you libertarians take over? Well, why should we have to move out of the country? Why should anyone have to move out of the country just because there's a new regime in power? And do our rights change? Well, I guess they do, because they believe that rights come from government, just like people in the old days believe that rights come from God. Yep, it's religion, folks. And it's very one-sided and arbitrary, and they want different rules for them than they have for us, so that's really about all I have to say, and I'm back home now, so I'm going to get in and get some work done and get this uploaded at some point during the day. So to close off, since this has been kind of a Lord T. Hawkeye-esque video with me just kind of rambling on about my thoughts, then I'll give Lord T. Hawkeye's exit. Be aware and be wise.